So a few years ago, I kind of redid this little closet in the unfinished area of our basement to become a home office area for me and for my business. And I have used it and abused it over the last few years, and I absolutely still love it, but it needed a huge refresh. You can see I have sort of things everywhere. I had and ended up using this kind of plastic resin shelving just to use for storage. I originally had a desk in there, but I knew that I wasn't actually sitting in this area to work. It had more become just like a file area, a storage area, and I did access it every single day, multiple times per day. But I know I needed it more for storage. Then I also had a secondary office space outside of the home that I was no longer using, but I had to bring everything home from that. So I ended up with all of these files and office supplies and everything, and I needed a home for that. I ended up buying two new items for this project, which is this pack of bankers boxes, which I was really excited about, and then this dresser. So I wanted, again, some storage, some closed storage that I could sort of didn't have as much visual clutter, but I also wanted something kind of cute. So I found this on Marketplace and I love it, and I really wanted to incorporate it. So as you can see, I have my helpers with me. I did this over the Christmas break. I was really excited about having a new space to kick off like the new year. So our first step which is the first step in a lot of the projects, is to take every single thing out. So we just pulled everything out of this closet or this office area and took it into like our finished, on the other side of that wall is sort of like our finished basement area. And I knew it would be a nicer area to actually do the sorting and like decluttering and focusing. So I just simply pulled everything out. My main focus was getting rid of things I wasn't using anymore, upgrading the look of it. So I want it to look like a little bit nicer. I had really just been focusing on function up until now. And thirdly, I wanted to organize my files, my paper files. So I had like a rough system, but now that I kind of knew the type of files I was definitely using all the time and year after year, I wanted to have like a actual permanent, like solid system for how I was going through things. One thing I love about this space is you can see that top shelf. I have like my printer, and Scott was able to like hook it up so that it's, because there's no plug obviously in this closet. However, I'm able to have the printer right in there with everything else, which I absolutely love. You can see too, these are some hanging files that I also found on Marketplace. Again, I've had these for several years. But I just wanted to upgrade the labels, that kind of thing. I do actually really love them. You'll see in a bit what I end up storing in them. So here again, you'll have, this is the unfinished area of our basement, like I mentioned. So it's just concrete flooring, and that's been painted. And we're kind of like, probably, I'm not the only one who deals with this. The painting sort of peels and like doesn't look great or gets stained. And that was not something I was going to tackle today, but I just wanted to do a quick vacuum just to like clean it a little bit to make it feel fresh for putting everything back in. And the dresser I ended up really liking in here. I was, when you measure something and technically it's gonna fit, but you're like, I don't know how it's gonna actually look in there. It ended up looking great. It was definitely a little lower than I expected, but still really great, and actually is perfect for like a little kind of workspace for when I'm, sorting my files or anything down there, when I'm putting things away. So the next step was to go back into where all the stuff was. So this is where we brought everything out and put it into our like the finished living area. If I had been working alone, I would have obviously brought things out and sorted them by category. However, if you've ever worked with kids around, helping out, it can definitely be distracting. And Leo, he's older, he's 8. He can kind of just like flutter around. He does his own thing. He just sort of wants to hang out and be near us, whereas Amy Rose wants to be in there. She wants to help. She wants to be a part of every single project if she's around. So, and it's very sweet. So I try to like encourage it, I guess. First off, I just needed to give her a project. So I ended up I wanted her to label this box for me. So we ended up, if you've ever worked in an office, you've seen these bankers boxes before. It felt like such a flashback for me because I spent like my whole adult life working in offices, and I must have built probably 100 or more of these bankers boxes in my life. Anyway, it was like a flashback. And the reason I chose this a banker's box rather than a plastic like file tote, because we do have a couple of those plastic file totes that we use for like our home files, our personal and family files, because we're using those all the time, like referencing them all the time. But I'm trying to reduce like how much unnecessary plastic items or anything that I think, you know what, that's going to end up breaking and living like in a landfill for 1,000 years. So this was a file box that I know I wasn't going to be referencing. I was just going to live or hold basically my income tax stuff. So stuff that I had to keep, like in case it got audited or in case I ever need to reference it, but really it was just going to sit in our crawl space with files. So I'm like, why would I waste money and plastic on something like that when I can just use a cardboard box, perfect, basically. It was nice to have a fresh one, I will say that, for like the banker's box. But the other thing, the only bummer of it, the banker's box, was I had to buy a pack of 4. I only needed 1 box, but anyway, I'll use them for client projects, so it's fine. But that was the only annoying thing about it. So throughout the video, I only show a couple like short-ish clips of me sorting paper. But honestly, in reality, that was probably the most time-consuming part of this. And the crazy part is, I feel like my files were already pretty organized. Like I was already very organized. My files or my taxes are all like, you know, up to date. I had things labeled, I had it sorted. But just even with being organized, paperwork just takes so much time. And this is very common in all of our client projects. Anytime we do a home office, like it's sometimes days and days of going through paperwork. Or if it's an estate project and someone has, you know, passed on and their family is left to deal with the paperwork, it's so often just stuff that needs to be thrown out or shredded and doesn't need to be kept. But to go through and find the stuff, you know, the odd paperwork we do need, it's so time consuming. So one thing I will definitely say with like offices that often become dumping grounds or paperwork you have to go through, just start. Even if you're only doing like a box a year or, you know, 2 boxes a year, over the next 10 years, you're going to be so much better off and so much more ahead of the game than if you just sort of leave it and try to pretend it doesn't even exist. And that's what I'm going to try to focus on for a lot of my content in the new year in 2025, is just basically just starting. I think it can be so intimidating for people and thinking, oh, I need to, like, my whole office needs to be reset like Marianne did it and I need to spend 5 hours doing it. Like, absolutely not. Like, this is something that, you know, comes a bit more naturally to me and that I love doing, but it doesn't always have to be that extreme. It can just simply be, I'm going through this one miscellaneous box that we haven't touched since we moved. And I promise that just doing that one will feel so good. So anyway, just a small note about paperwork is that really it does add up, but getting through it little by little can be huge. So as I mentioned, we start sorting by category. So I'm just trying to put all of my office supplies together so I can see, you know, how many paper clips do I have? How many pens? How many file folders do I need? Do I have an excess amount? Can I get rid of some? And then, you know, deal with all my promotional materials. I have some old business cards. And I've shared that in other videos before. I've actually, you know, because you evolve and change, and it's hard to, I think, sometimes let go of, like, you know, past projects you've worked on or that haven't worked out, or that, you know, you think, should I keep this for a memory or for like in case? And there's so much of that in offices. I find they can become dumping grounds for like items that you need maybe in the future. What I'm going through right there is paper agendas. So I still use a paper agenda. So I have these years and years of agendas, which you'll see I end up getting rid of, except for my current year. But that's something in the past that I have kept. Journals sometimes I've kept. But over the years, like, I'm 40 years old and never have I referenced, you know, these old agendas. Like, why am I keeping these? So again, more paperwork I'm dealing with here. Another paperwork thing I should mention is that in our area, we have Staples is our main like kind of stationery store now, and they do shredding. And I know you could probably do shredding. And so if you work in an office, they probably have a shredder or a shredding service. But it is such an amazing service. We use it for clients all the time, especially like if you're downsizing or we're doing home offices. I think it's like $1.50 per pound. None of my things here had to be shredded. It was all just recycle or toss. But just something to keep in the back of your mind if you're like, oh my gosh, Marian, but I have these boxes that need to be shredded. A lot of, if you live in the country, a lot of it are just technically just get burned, which is great too. But if you need things shredded, it's 100% worth it. You just take it to Staples, they weigh it, you throw it into the bin, and then they do all the shredding for you, which is, honestly, I love it. Another thing I want to mention here is during this, if you're working, again, like I mentioned, with small kids around, I remember after the end of this day thinking I was just so overwhelmed. I felt like I had just been so, neglecting the kids, and like I felt like I'd been really short with them all day. But then when I went back and watched this video and like some of the clips, I was like, oh, we actually had like a few moments that I think she really like loved just hanging around and being a part of it. And there was actually, I was a better parent than I thought that day. So I feel like a good reminder to give yourself, some grace and some slack, because you're probably doing way better than you think you're doing. Next up, I'm back in the unfinished area of the basement, sort of just outside of the office space, and I'm going through my like work clothing. So this is all branded clothing that I've purchased that we use and wear when we're on client projects. And I had a bunch of extra that I bought, for new team members, or like if ours sort of wears out, that sort of thing. But it was like, it had been sitting there for several years, and I thought, why am I just like leaving this down here? So I ended up finding, sorting some of the stuff that like I knew that me or some of the current team members could wear. And then I kept just like a few items back. Next up is I grabbed a Post-it note and a Sharpie. And this is something I do all the time when I am space planning for client projects. So if we are, say, doing a kitchen or a pantry, especially when I get to the point where I am like tired, overwhelmed, I feel like, where do I start? What do I do next? And all I do is start jotting down all of the categories. So if I know, I have these particular files, where am I going to put them? I know I need somewhere for office supplies. I know I need to put my Cricut somewhere. I know I need to do, put things in different areas. And even if I don't end up putting things where I think they're going to, it's like I just need a plan to start. I need a draft plan to like kind of kick off where I'm putting things, because I just need like a guide to get me started, and then I'm totally fine. So if you're done your decluttering area, if you're working on a specific spot, especially I find in kitchens or pantries, because there are so many categories and so many cupboards, that it can become overwhelming. I find this strategy helps us so often. Sometimes I only leave the Post-its on, honestly, for like 10 minutes. And I'm like, okay, I'm good now. And then I take them off, and we kind of like start putting things where we want them, or rejigging to what like works best. But it's like you just sometimes need an initial game plan. So that's one huge tip if you're working on an area that you're trying to put things back and you're not sure where things should go. So in the drawers, I was really with the drawers, I thought I was going to need the like little organizers and separators and things, but honestly, there was just some bigger items I put in there, and I didn't even label the drawers. I felt like, you know what, I'm fine with this. It's only me that accesses it, and I just felt like it was just like, it kind of gets to the point where you want, as long as it feels good to you who's accessing it, and that anyone who's accessing it knows where things are going to go, that's kind of the level where I want things to be at. So you will see on the far right on the bottom shelf that blue like hanging file rack. That is what I use month after month for my files. And I use like every single day I probably access it. And although it was like blue and it wasn't cute, it didn't really go with my aesthetic, I was actually fine with it, because I just love it so much, and I didn't want to replace it, so I didn't even care that it was blue. I'm just like, I'm keeping this, it works perfectly, and I'm not replacing it. Next up, you'll see I keep all of my paper clips, again, something I use constantly, just in a jar. So I've had them in an old pickle jar this whole time, and it works totally fine. But since I was doing like a reset, I thought, you know what, I want to put this into at least a jar that doesn't have like an actual pickle lid. So I put Andy Rose in charge of putting the paper clips into the new jar that has just this gold lid. And I think it's just like, again, it's an old pasta sauce or something, but it just had a cuter lid. And then I end up putting, I think, the pickle jar back into the cupboard upstairs, and I'll use it for like an actual food item. So this is another good job if you have helper, just coming up with like little side jobs for them to do while you're trying to concentrate has basically saved me on jobs like this. You can see she's very proud of it at the end. She's got the lid on, a few extra paper clips, but we're not gonna be too picky. And paper clips again or something. I end up putting this jar inside the top drawer of the new dresser, which so I can easily grab it, and every single month when I'm reconciling my files, I just take it upstairs to do my work. Next thing I did was make labels. Okay, number one, you do not need a label maker. However, I wanted to share this one because I'm obsessed with it. We use it all the time. I would not own this if I did not have like client projects. Like I wouldn't just own this for home because I think it costs like $170 or $150, I forget, but it wasn't cheap. And really, before I started doing client projects, like I'm not sure if I even had a label maker, maybe just a really basic one. I do still have a simpler, like more basic label maker as well that I use for smaller labels, but this makes a thicker label. So my like handheld label maker I use makes, I think it's 12 millimeter, and this one makes, I think, 24 millimeters. So it's like they're just a bit thicker. So they're nicer on things where you want to really be able to see everything basically. So they're really great in kitchens and pantries. And it just attaches, as you can see, to an app on my phone. Another tip for label makers or labels is that I buy just like the off-brand, the no name, I guess, label tape, and it works totally fine. I remember when I first bought it, I was so paranoid I was going to wreck my machine by using the off brand, but that is all I've used, and it has never been an issue. It works great, it sticks great, and it's never affected my machine. So that's like one small little money saving tip, because the on brand label tape is like $1,000 million. CRA is Canada Revenue Agency for anyone who does not live in Canada, and it's basically like who we have to deal with for all of our taxes. So that's like a main file that I use. And there wasn't like, I don't use a ton day to day. So there's just like my client files, and I wanted to categorize them by year. And then I wanted some actual labels to put on the like actual hanging, the metal like racks in the side of the office space. The other tip I have for label makers, if you really, really want one, is to share them. So if you want a label, if you want to have labels, but you're like, really, Marianne, I only use this like a couple times a year, it's like a nice item to share with like your mom or sister or best friend or something like that you live close to, so you can pass it back and forth, but that maybe you can share like the cost of it basically, and just even storing it. Like if you're not, I've seen so many smaller like handheld ones now though that clients have that I'm like, I've never even heard of that, and it's just teeny tiny ones that might work just fine. But this one, if you're like really into label making, I'm obsessed with this P-Touch. As you can see, Amy Rose had already made like little handwritten labels while we were working away, but apparently I didn't feel too guilty to cover them. So you can see here, I'm struggling here. I'm like, where do I put this? I end up putting it in the center of the rack, and then in a minute you'll see that once I put the files in, they actually cover that. I did not clue into that until I did it. So I ended up just peeling them off and putting them in the top left-hand corner. So this, like I mentioned this, I think I did mention that this rack it's like an IKEA file folder, or file rack, I guess you could say, but I found it on Marketplace. Both of them were just on Marketplace. Again, someone was probably just resetting their office area at home and wanting to get rid of it. So I think, I don't know, I got them for like $10 each or something like that. I got them for a few years ago, and I've really loved them. They just work well in this space because I don't have a lot of like a ton of space, obviously, and just they fit perfectly into these two little side walls. So they were something I've really, really loved. The other side here are like more reference materials. So the top is like my office supplies and file folders. Then I have books. So I don't keep a ton of books. I'm a huge reader, but like I don't keep a ton of workbooks, except for the ones that I know, like I've referenced these multiple times over the years. I also have a little area for journals, and I'm going to actually link this journal, this one particular, I can't remember the name of it. It's in that second little rack, but I love it. I have bought it multiple times because I love it so much. It's like a daily journal. And then the little colorful books are the kids' books that I write in like every few months. I write in like a little something like, this is what's happening in your life right now. And then my plan is that when they grow up, they can have these books, I can give them to them, and they can look back and think of all the things they did when they were little kids. So I don't do it very often, so don't like feel guilty if you don't do it. It's only every few months when I remember to do it. Okay, so this, I want to quickly show you. You can tell that this is actually the next day. So again, reality check. I got to the point where I'm like, I need a break from this. And it was also, like I said, Christmas holiday, so I wanted to go hang out with the family. And then the next day I'm like, okay, I'm ready to finish up the project. And I just wanted to show you all the stuff that was outgoing. So these were little, I used them for business cards, I think, at a different location. And I'm like, I actually love them. So I wanted to try to use them, but I couldn't incorporate them. So I got rid of those, passed them on. This basket we've had forever, but I just couldn't find a home for it. And that's what you'll find, I feel like, as we continue to like simplify and declutter, we need less and fewer bins and baskets. I had a random like legal size file folder, and I only use letter size, so I'm like, why am I keeping this? Got rid of that. This is the old pickle jar that you saw when we switched over to like our fancier pickle jar. So I just put that back up in the pantry, I think, and I'll use it for some type of food item. This was a microphone I bought a while back, and I used it forever, but it just it stopped working, and I couldn't fix it. It was driving me crazy, and I never actually used it anymore. So like, why am I keeping it? I think I put it in my hazardous waste bin in the garage. Oh, these racks, like, aren't they cute? They're gold. I love them. They're so cute to hold like paper or files. But this is like a typical dollar store thing. They aren't like a proper size. They aren't 8.5 by 11, which is what like paper is in our area. So it drove me crazy because the paper always like curled up. So I'm like, forget it. I'm not using these anymore. They're useless to me, no matter how much I think they're cute. And I got rid of them. This is like some packaging. So I had, if you've ordered anything from like Canva printed, I think it was like my business cards. Getting rid of packaging helps a lot with like visual clutter and just clutter in general. This was an old like laptop tray, but we don't use external like mice anymore, so we didn't need it. A couple of books I had that were really on brand, and same with these magazines. Like, I love the idea of keeping them, but really I didn't have room for like a lot of like cutesy things in here, and I didn't actually reference them, so it felt kind of weird to keep them. These were some hanging file folders that one thing I tried to do to simplify that area, to make it visually simpler, was to get rid of like the more colorful file folders. I didn't need all of them, so I just kept the ones that all matched and got rid of the mismatched ones. Same, these are just like a few office supplies that I just simply didn't need anymore. And now I'm going to show you a few before and after clips. If you remember, this is how it looked before. Just needed a little bit of love, some TLC, and I'm so happy with how it turned out. It's like funny how it looks a lot better, but even just, it's like me knowing that everything is in place, that I have a home for everything like I feel like is a lot more intentional now. Like I mentioned, I know what I use all the time, what I want to keep, and I have a spot for it. And every time, this was a couple weeks ago now that I've done it, and every time I've gone in here, it's just felt so good and like so calm. So rather than having this be like something that's sort of on my to-do list, it's something now that feels so good to go into, and it feels me more excited for work and more excited for like staying organized and keeping on top of things. So I hope this motivates you, even if you just have like a small little corner of your dining room that's for your office supplies or anything like that. I hope that kind of motivates you and keeps you inspired to, create these simple, calm spaces in your home. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and watch out for new videos from me. Thank you so much for being here as always, and have a wonderful day. Thanks guys. Bye.